That was your last meal, wasn't it?
You truly have a good heart, ma'am. Sir, I believe you dropped this.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you kindly, ma'am.
Rich rancher slept in a shed pretending to be poor, testing if anyone would love him.
Please, ma'am, I'm much obliged.
What on earth? Where did this come from?
The stagecoach rattled to a stop in the dusty streets of Silver Ridge, Montana, and Eleanor Mitchell felt her heart racing beneath her worn cotton dress. The year was 1892, and the September wind carried the first whisper of autumn across the golden prairie, rustling through her hair like a gentle welcome. She stepped down from the coach on trembling legs, clutching her worn leather bag against her chest as if it contained her very soul. In truth, it contained everything she owned in this world. A few dresses that had been mended too many times, her mother's silver hairbrush, the only inheritance she had ever received, and a letter. That precious letter had promised her something she had almost stopped believing in. A new beginning, a home, a husband who wanted her. She had traveled 17 days from Boston, watching the world change outside her window, from crowded city streets to endless rolling plains. She had left behind the textile factory where she had worked since she was 14 years old, where the air was thick with cotton dust and the days blurred together in exhaustion. Her hands were rough and calloused from years of labor, but her heart remained soft, protected by stubborn hope that refused to die no matter how hard life tried to crush it. The letter had come from a man named Richard Townsend, a respectable merchant seeking a wife to share his home and future. His words had been formal but kind. He had described his shop, his modest success, his desire for companionship. Eleanor had read that letter so many times that the paper had grown soft at the creases. She had whispered his promises to herself during the long journey, holding them close like prayers. Eleanor was 26 years old, and people back home had already started calling her a spinster behind her back. She had overheard the whispers in the factory dormitory. Too old, too poor, too plain. Who would want her now? But Richard Townsend had wanted her. At least his letters had said so. She smoothed her blue traveling dress, painfully aware of its faded color and patched hem. Silver Ridge was smaller than she had imagined. A general store stood on one corner, its wooden sign swinging gently in the breeze. A white church steeple rose against the endless Montana sky like a finger pointing toward heaven. Horses stood tied to posts, swishing their tails lazily. Everything smelled of dust and sage and possibility. Eleanor took a deep breath and walked toward the address written in Richard Townsend's letter. Each step felt like walking toward her destiny. Her heart hammered so loudly she wondered if the townspeople could hear it. This was the moment she had dreamed about. This was her chance to finally belong somewhere. The merchant's shop was easy to find. The painted sign read Townsend Mercantile in faded green letters. Eleanor pushed open the door with trembling fingers, and a small bell announced her arrival with a cheerful ring that felt almost mocking, given what was about to happen. Behind the counter stood a round-faced man with thinning hair and small, suspicious eyes that reminded her of a rat examining a trap. He looked up from his ledger and frowned, his gaze traveling over her dusty dress, her tired face, her rough hands. "Mr. Townsend, I'm Eleanor Mitchell. I've come all the way from Boston." She forced brightness into her voice. "You sent for me." The man's face changed. Something cold and calculating passed across his features like a shadow. He set down his pen with deliberate slowness and crossed his arms over his chest. "I know exactly who you are," he said, his voice flat and cutting as a blade. "I received a letter last week from a woman in Boston who knows your family. She told me things about your past that you conveniently forgot to mention in your letters." Eleanor felt her stomach drop like a stone thrown into a deep well. What things? I don't understand what you mean. Your father was a drunk who died owing money to half the city. Your mother took in washing from strangers until she worked herself into an early grave. You've been living in a factory dormitory like a common laborer, sleeping in a room with 12 other women. His words struck her like stones thrown by cruel children. Each one found its mark. I'm building a business here, Miss Mitchell. I need a wife who can help me rise in society, not drag me down into the mud where you came from. The arrangement is off. You should never have come. Eleanor stood frozen in the middle of the shop, unable to move or speak. The dream she had carried across 1,700 miles, the dream she had protected through every lonely night of her journey, shattered around her feet like broken glass. Those things are true, she finally whispered, but I never lied to you. I told you I worked in a factory. I told you my parents were gone. You didn't tell me you came from nothing, less than nothing. Richard Townsend shook his head with undisguised disgust. I have a reputation to protect. Eleanor felt something breaking inside her chest. What am I supposed to do now? That's not my concern, Richard said, already returning to his ledger as if she had ceased to exist. The stagecoach goes back east on Friday. I suggest you be on it. Good day, Miss Mitchell. Eleanor walked out of the shop in a daze. The afternoon sun, harsh and mocking on her face. She had exactly $3.40 to her name. Friday was. 5 days away. She had no place to sleep, no food waiting for her, and not a single person in this entire town who knew her name or cared whether she lived or died. She was completely alone in a way she had never been before. She wandered through Silver Ridge like a ghost, too proud to cry in public, too broken to think clearly. She asked at the restaurant if they needed help. The owner barely looked at her before shaking his head. She asked at the boarding house if she could work in exchange for a room. The woman looked at her dusty dress and tired face and said they had no need for extra help. By evening, Eleanor found herself sitting on a wooden bench near the edge of town, watching the sun sink toward the western mountains. The sky turned orange and pink and purple, a breathtaking display of beauty that felt almost cruel given her circumstances. God was painting the heavens while she sat wondering if she would survive the week. She had one biscuit left from her journey, wrapped carefully in a handkerchief in her bag. She was saving it for tomorrow, when the hunger would be worse. That's when she noticed the man sitting against the old wooden fence across the road. He looked worse off than she did, which she hadn't thought possible. His clothes were worn thin at the elbows and knees. His face was gaunt, with several days of stubble shadowing his jaw. He sat with his head leaning back against the fence post, his eyes closed, his chest rising and falling with slow, exhausted breaths. Eleanor watched him for a long moment. Then she noticed his hands. They were trembling slightly, the way hands tremble when a body has gone too long without food. She knew that trembling intimately. She had felt it herself during the hard winters in Boston, when the factory cut wages and meals became memories. Something powerful stirred in Eleanor's heart. She looked at the biscuit. In her bag, $3.40. One biscuit. 5 days until the stagecoach. Every practical thought screamed at her to keep that biscuit for herself. She needed it. She might die without it, but her mother's voice echoed in her memory, as clear as if she was standing beside her. When you have nothing, Eleanor, giving is the truest measure of your heart. Anyone can be generous when their pockets are full. Eleanor stood up and walked across the dusty road. Her boots made soft sounds in the dirt. The man opened his eyes when he heard her footsteps, and she found herself looking into the most striking eyes she had ever seen. They were grey-blue, like the Montana sky before a storm, sharp and intelligent, despite his ragged appearance. There was something in those eyes that didn't quite match his circumstances, something she couldn't name. "Excuse me," Eleanor said softly. "I couldn't help noticing. When did you last eat?" The man studied her face for a long moment, as if he was reading something written there. "Yesterday morning," he said. "Maybe the day before. Time gets fuzzy when you're between jobs." Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out the biscuit. She held it out to him like an offering. "It's not much, but please take it." The man looked at the biscuit, then back at her face. "That looks like the last of your food," he said quietly. "I can tell by the way you were holding that bag. You're in trouble too, aren't you?" Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I am," she admitted, "but you need this more than I do right now. Please." The man took the biscuit slowly, his rough fingers brushing against hers. "Why would you do this? You don't know me. I could be anyone. My mother used to say that kindness given to strangers is the only kindness that truly counts. Anyone can be generous with people they know. And love. It takes real character to help someone you'll never see again." The man took a small bite of the biscuit, chewing slowly as if savoring every crumb. His eyes never left her face. "What's your name?" "Eleanor Mitchell." "Sit with me, Eleanor Mitchell. Tell me what brought you to Silver Ridge with nothing but heartbreak in your eyes." So she did. She sat down on the dusty ground beside him, propriety forgotten, and told him everything, the advertisement in the newspaper. The hopeful letters exchanged over months. The long journey filled with dreams. The cruel rejection in Richard Townsend's shop. The man listened without interrupting, his grey-blue eyes soft with understanding. "That merchant is a fool," he said when she finished. "The worst kind of fool. The kind who measures a person's worth by things that don't matter and misses the treasure standing right in front of him." "He's not wrong about my past," Eleanor said. "My father did die in debt. My family has no standing. Standing is earned, not inherited. The person you are matters infinitely more than the circumstances you were born into. Your past doesn't define you. Your choices do." His words wrapped around her wounded heart like a warm blanket on a cold night. "What's your name?" she asked. "Thomas. Thomas Callahan. I've been drifting through ranch country looking for work. Haven't had much luck lately." Eleanor made a decision without thinking. "There's an abandoned shed behind the old livery stable. The roof is mostly intact. You're welcome to share it with me. I know it's not proper, but I don't think either of us can afford proper right now." Thomas smiled, and it transformed his thin face completely. Despite the stubble and worn clothes, warmth radiated from that smile like sunshine breaking through clouds. Over the next 4 days, Eleanor and Thomas survived together. She found small jobs, pound town, washing dishes for coins, mending clothes for bread, sweeping the church steps for preserves. Everything she earned, she shared with Thomas without hesitation. But she noticed something strange. Thomas never seemed to look for work with urgency. Instead, he spent his days asking questions about her childhood, about her dreams, about what she valued most in marriage, what made a house a home, what kind of mother she hoped to be. Eleanor answered honestly because she had nothing left to lose. On the 4th evening, Eleanor returned to find Thomas gone. In his place was a note asking her to come to the Callahan ranch. She walked 2 miles on trembling legs. The main house appeared through the trees, and she stopped breathing. It was beautiful. A large wooden home with a wraparound porch. Healthy pastures stretched in every direction. Horses grazed peacefully. Standing on the porch was Thomas, clean-shaven, dressed in a fine white shirt. He looked like a different person, yet his eyes were exactly the same. I don't understand, Eleanor whispered. Thomas came down to meet her. I own this ranch, Eleanor. 6,000 acres, the bank in town, 3 other businesses. His voice grew thick. 3 other businesses. His voice grew thick. I'd been looking for a wife for 3 years, but every woman only saw my money. So I pretended to be poor, to find someone who would love me with nothing. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face. You gave me your last biscuit, Thomas said, pulling out a simple gold ring. You shared everything you had. You showed me your heart before you knew about my fortune. That's worth more than all the gold in Montana. Will you marry me? Yes, Eleanor whispered. Yes, they married 3 weeks later. Richard Townsend sat in the back, his face pale as ash. When people asked Thomas why he chose a rejected bride with nothing, his answer became legend. She fed a starving stranger her last bite of foal. Odd. She gave me her heart when she thought I had nothing. That's the only love worth having. And every year after they watched the sunset together, remembering the moment kindness changed everything,